So it sort of carries on with the theme of enclosures and dispossession. And I think the land grab or the water grab, whatever grab, resource grab debate is really very central to the issue of resource politics in many ways. I've been working on resource politics for a long time. I mean, if you can look at it in terms of contested access and claims over resources, but not just the materiality of the resource, not just in terms of material access, but also in terms of knowledge claims, contested knowledge claims in the way we view resources, in terms of control, etc. So it moves across a whole arenas, lots of arenas. So land grabbing, as I said, Amber's already mentioned the sort of triple crisis of 2008, 2009, the crisis of land, food, climate, and around that a lot of things were happening. It's sort of known in academic discourse around land grabbing, but there are lots of different terminology to understand this phenomenon that took place. The land rush, large-scale land acquisitions, a rising interest in farmland. Others have called it sort of agricultural investment that's much needed to enhance growth, productivity, or indeed land deals. It is a political terminology to use the word grab, and in some ways the term grabbing raises very disturbing memories of past enclosures and dispossessions. And this is intended because the term grabbing is intended to grab attention and to direct it towards a new twist in the sort of process of enclosures, towards a present-day injustice. So if we hadn't used the term grab, actually, if the term grabbing hadn't been used, maybe today's cycle of land, water, green grabbing may have gone invisible. So in some ways, but it's still very, very difficult to understand what we understand or what we mean by land grabbing. Now, a whole host of actors and constellations have taken place, and drivers and actors in enabling these different land acquisitions, deals, processes to take place. Asian powers seeking to secure food supply elsewhere, the movement and actions of oil-rich but land and water-poor Gulf states, for example, moving and seeking new frontiers, largely in different parts of Africa. European and North American banks, financiers, sovereign funds responding to the financial crisis. This is what Amber has already spoken about. The BRICS, emerging economies asserting themselves and moving elsewhere, China, Brazil, India, etc. We've already heard about green growth, green economy from Amber. I mean, that was also part of this process. And a lot of these actors and drivers were acting in partnership with governments and or domestic partners. And so that's why in some ways a lot of people have said, how can you call it a grab? Because in some ways a lot of these processes are extremely legal. You have domestic players, you have national governments that open up. So the grab is more about what's actually happening, the process of dispossession, the reallocation of crucial resources. And why it's classic resource politics for me, because in some ways these landscapes that you see here mean different things to different actors. So this picture here before, herder in a forest, a lot of people would call this landscape marginal, underutilized. This pastoralist obviously would have no formal rights. So the rights of these people are in informal systems, so they're largely invisible. Whatever they produce is also largely invisible because it's never accounted in formal systems. And so this is a marginal landscape that needs to be transformed to something like that. This crop means many, many different things to many people. So jatropha, many years ago, was this future, the crop for the future where we'd create energy. But obviously, there's been all sorts of competing claims around what it means for local food security, what it means for local livelihoods, etc. And indeed, also its environmental costs. How much water does it need, for example? What happens to the land after you have this, as opposed to something that's more multiple like that? So contested meanings around the same landscape, and indeed transformations of the landscape. So how do you theorize a lot of these processes? Resource grabbing in general broadly refers to the appropriation of natural resources, including land and water, and the control of their associated use and benefits with or without the transfer of ownership. It usually moves from poor and marginalized to powerful actors. So a lot of the critical work has largely focused and drawn on political economy and Marxist traditions, in particular David Harvey's notion of accumulation by dispossession. But there are also other conceptions. For example, Karen Backer quotes the enclosure of public assets by private interest for profit, resulting in greater social inequity. So it's just different ways of making sense of this process. Amber's already spoken about the processes of privatization, financialization. I won't really mention that anymore. But what's very important is I think this debate really came on, if you look at the trends in resource politics, we had a long period where there was a lot of focus on the discursive. So political ecology really focused and tried to marry political economy with post-structuralist trends in social science. So really looking at contested knowledge claims, looking at contested claims around how you understand the resource. So as I said, the grabbing stuff really brought back Marxist analysis into this debate, because political ecology had married political economy, and it had a very strong post-structuralist turn also, which was very useful. But I think through the grabbing debate, you had this the sort of Marxist discussion come back in, and it really became very, very important. Land grabbing and water grabbing, resource grabbing, is also control grabbing, and that's a very central concept. Capturing the power to control resources and how they're used in order to corner the benefits. So in that sense, you're not just looking at, who's capturing this land here, but actually who's getting the benefits out of it. And with a resource like water, it's particularly important, because water is a fluid, slippery resource, and, benefits and harms move upstream, downstream. There's all sorts of surface groundwater interactions. And in that sense, looking at benefits and control is sort of more important. And control grabbing is a very contingent process. It's marked by conflict, by negotiation and friction, and it can ratify existing balance of power by state and non-state actors in very many different ways. And it's important to note, especially when you start looking at other resources, not just land, that it's not just about agriculture. You have to go beyond agriculture, and especially because I've worked on water grabbing, agriculture matters, but it's not just that. It's also in different sectors. It's mining, it's energy, it's control of, and it's very difficult to point out what exactly is being grabbed and by whom and when. And so now let me just give you some examples about the water grab. As I said, a lot of headline attentions to land grabbing did not really focus much on other resources. It was all about the actual material, fixed land. But often water, it was found, is that water was a hidden agenda of the so-called land grab, and many people then said that behind every lot of sort of land grab that you have, there is a water grab. This is because water is often a hidden agenda. People get the land, and that way they get control over water or the benefits around water. And as I've already argued, there are very powerful narratives around scarcity and abundance. A lot of my work has been to denaturalize scarcity, to really point out the fact that scarcity is deeply political. It's not something that's out there, that's natural. And in that sense, you really question the argument that the land is marginal or water is abundant. I mean, these are just narratives to justify these processes, but usually that's not the case at all. So the water grab is actually quite complicated, and I said it's very difficult to understand what's being grabbed. This is because of fluctuating availability across time and space, sort of varied impacts in terms of distribution, even on water quality. So you could be doing something somewhere, and downstream effects could be pollution, and that in some ways is also part of a grab and a reappropriation of water, and dislocated effects and impacts of the grab. And we're already talking about a very contested resource from, its very outset. It's molded by unequal access. It's molded by unequal power relations. But then these processes intensify that. All the grabs, be they land grabs, green grabs, water grabs, I mean, they take place through a multiplicity of processes. As I said, often there's a lot of policy obscurity, so people can justify these processes because often they can use policies in different ways. And the policy processes we heard this morning is shaped by particular actors, by particular interests. In many cases, especially around water, when you're looking at mining or hydropower, you find sectoral reform and a redefinition of laws also facilitates grabs to take place, to allow the state to or corporate actors to access resources in particular ways. You're talking about a coalition of different interests and actors. And it's wrong to just say these are all foreign players. I mean, very often domestic players benefit a lot. There's an active role of the state. And indeed, a lot of local people could also benefit in different ways. The complexities around tenure also enable these processes to take place. I already mentioned the fact that we're talking about a lot of people who have their rights in customary law, and these rights are largely unrecognized, and so that enables big players to capture resources, to grab resources. We're talking about a complex intertwining between water and land rights, and a lot of complexities around negotiations, compensation, poor environmental and social impacts, etc. And so what you have across the board, and there is lots and lots of, there's a whole politics of data, what is actually happening, how many millions of hectares have been transferred, but you're having significant reappropriation of resources, significant changes in water, in land tenure relations. A lot of impacts in terms of people's basic rights and access to resources, and a lot of diversion and consumption of large amounts of water, of land, changes, there's lots of data around it. And indeed, in a lot of these cases, I did a special issue for water alternatives together with colleagues, and we found in many of these cases, be they in Asia, in different parts of Latin America, Africa, you have both covert and overt forms of resistance. There are some spaces where there is potential for change, but very often that is subverted, because of assertions of power, etc. So to wrap up, when I looked at both water and land grabs together, obviously both were shaped by unequal power relations. Both happen because there are unclear distinctions between legality and illegality, as well as formal and informal rights. And both of them are fraught with sort of very tricky licensing and negotiation processes. But the water grab was a more fuzzy process, and in some ways we said it was nice to look at it as a very slippery, it's more slippery in some ways. It's more slippery, it's more fuzzy, because we're talking about a fluid resource that's very difficult to manage and control. There are very unclear administrative boundaries and jurisdictions, dislocation of effects upstream, downstream, because of surface and groundwater interactions, and a lot of fluctuations in availability over time and space. So this is something that's still unfolding, that's difficult to understand, and it's part of this historical wider process, but something distinct that's happening right now. Thanks.